What up, TCK Potters? Welcome back to the program. I'm your host, Sky Guasco. This is another episode of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast, aka TCK Pod. This is episode 433. I've got my man Bobby LaMarco joining me once again this evening. We're rolling through the team previews of the AFC South. We have the Titans and the Texans this evening. If you missed our Colts and Jaguars breakdown with James Johnson and my man breaking it down with Jacob Charno on the Colts side, please make sure you dial it back one episode and catch those. We're wrapping up the AFC South tonight. We're getting into the NFC South coming up next week, and we are done with team previews, getting you ready to go for your drafts. Bobby, I'm excited to get into these team previews. It's tough getting into a team like the Texans with not a lot of fantasy relevance, but we're trying to find the nuggets where we possibly can. On the flip side, the Titans are loaded anyway, and they bring in my man Julio Jones, so it should be a fun one tonight.
You know what's the best part about the Texans is, like, we kind of can just say whatever we want, right? Because no one's expecting anything. So any nuggets we give today are good. So, I mean, let's do this. I love this. But before we do that, we're starting a new segment. We're going to open up every podcast with a hot question for Sky. Sky, this question is going to be brought to you by Bomb Banana Hot Sauce. SeekTheSpice.com. If you haven't been to Bomb Banana yet and tried out the Bomb Banana hot sauce, guys, I'm super disappointed. SeekTheSpice.com. Banana-based, not banana-flavored. Use the promo code TCK to get 10% off. Now, that hot question for you, Sky, is simple. Derrick Henry, consensus 3-4 pick. Are you buying Derrick Henry this year at the 3-4 pick overall?
Whew. All right, buying meaning drafting or buying that he will finish fourth overall? Because in my opinion, those are different questions.
Are you drafting him third or fourth overall?
I will draft him fourth in half and non-PPR. In full PPR, I've got him at 5. I've got CMC, Cook, Kamara, my top 3, and then I've got Zeke ahead of him in full PPR. In half or in non, I'll give Henry the nod. Here's the deal. He ran for 2,000 yards last year. Vegas has him at 1,555. That's significantly lower. If they had him at 17, 18, I'd have a better chance of him maybe repeating 2,000. 500 less yards on the Vegas odds is rough. We know he's not very active in the passing game. I love this offense, and Julio Jones should help Derrick Henry ultimately open the lanes. But the reality is they have another bona fide weapon. I know you love your boy Corey Davis from last year. Corey Davis is not Julio Jones, even at 31 years old. So will I draft Derrick Henry up in the top 4, the top 5? Yes, if it makes sense. In full PPR, though, I'm probably looking other ways. And honestly, I might even look at my man Tay Adams at number 5. You guys know I'm sprung on that, so I might even drop him down to 6. In half or standard, I'll take him at 4, Derrick Henry. Can he finish top 4? That one I am more convicted that he may not, because, again, if you have the pass-catching opportunities from everybody else, he's going to need that huge workload once again, and I don't think that he's going to need it this year for the Titans. If he's not getting 1,800-plus rushing yards, we know he's not going to get that in the passing game. And if his touchdowns come back down to earth anywhere close to even 12, then I don't see him getting top 5. So I'm not fading or hating on Derrick Henry, but top 4 is really tough for me in PPR especially.
All right, brother. Thank you, man. That was a great hot question of the day, hot spicy question, whatever we're going to call it at some point. But that's good. That's going to roll us right into the Titans. And if people have been watching the team previews with me, I'll give you like a quick breakdown of where these guys are going. So first off, let's talk about some of the highlights from the Texans. Of course, they promoted their tight ends coach, Todd Downing, to offensive coordinator. Todd Downing, the former OC for the Raiders for a season. Now, this offensive line is pretty good continuity. They do have 4 or 5 guys returning this year, but they did lose Dennis Kelly, their right tackle. Also, their first-round pick from a couple years ago was an absolute disaster, and he got cut. So there is one hole on that offensive line. They did draft a player in the NFL draft, Dylan Raduz. I don't even know if that's correct, but it might be. Always bad with the names. And then the skill positions. Obviously, the moving parts resulting in a lot of available targets. For example, Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith out the door. Insert Julio Jones and Josh Reynolds. As for the drafted players, it's really the only guy that I would say is notable is Dez Fitzpatrick for Dynasty maybe, but because of Julio Jones, it sounds like that's pretty much a wrap in the receiving core along with A.J. Brown. So of the moves so far, Sky, what do you think about the Todd Downing promotion, some of the movements with the skill position players? Anything stand out to you, maybe even on the offensive line?
Yeah, the Todd Downing promotion makes sense. Julio Jones coming over obviously is huge. You just got to stay healthy. That speaks for itself. The tight end position is going to be interesting. I know you love your man Anthony Furcher. I'm excited to hear about that right now. But Jonnu Smith leaving, Corey Davis leaving, even Adam Humphries leaving. I know opens up a ton of vacated targets. I'm sure you'll get into that. It really just comes down to, are they going to have the same offense that has been arguably the most efficient and surprisingly prolific? When you think of the Titans, you just think of like smash mouth with Derrick Henry. It's not necessarily. Ryan Tannehill, extremely efficient. A.J. Brown, incredibly efficient himself also. And now they bring in an all-pro Hall of Famer in Julio Jones. If he can stay healthy, they should be just fine. We'll see what happens this year. The big question is, can they hang with the Chiefs and the Bills? I think they can if they play Titans ball. If they have to play Bills or Chiefs football in a playoff game, I don't think the Titans defense has enough, but we're talking fantasy today.
Yeah, and it's key, too, because they did have some movement in the secondary as well. Dory Jackson didn't play a lot last year, but he's gone. They replaced Malcolm Butler with Janoris Jenkins. I don't really know. They also drafted Caleb Farley in the first round. So that could be something. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes, but that'll be interesting for this division as well. But let's talk about the first guy. It's Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill last year, 25.2 points per game, finished as the QB 11 in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. Currently, there's some optimism. Expert consensus ranking is 9th for QBs. ADP is 11th, and he's going 93rd overall in that 8-9 range. So when I looked at Ryan Tannehill and I was doing my research, something stood out. So Ryan Tannehill, for example, finished as the QB 11. Okay, that's 2 points better than number 12, which was Kirk Cousins. He was closer to the QB 6, which is Deshaun Watson, than he was the QB 12. There is a legit gap between Ryan. He might have been QB 11, but he was closer to QB 6 than he was QB 12. Now let's take it a step further. What about Ben Roethlisberger? Ben Roethlisberger last year somehow was a QB 13 in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. 0.3 points less than Ryan Tannehill. He was closer to Russell Wilson at QB 5 on a points per game basis than he was the QB 13. So this isn't a normal QB 11. So Ryan Tannehill is a difference maker. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. 3.3 points per game to the QB 13 is huge. And that makes him closer to the mid-range guys than anything else. So I think he is a difference maker. But some of the things that you need to think about with Todd Downing. Todd Downing, his lone season for the OC position with the Raiders. He actually had 592 dropbacks that year. The last 2 seasons, the Texans have the Titans have averaged 534. So that's about a 60-plus dropback increase, potentially, if Todd Downing sticks to the kind of play-calling style he did with Oakland. Last season, Ryan Tannehill, 4th in the NFL in fantasy points per dropback. That was his percentage was 20% higher than the QB 12. So he's an elite scorer on a per dropback basis. He's also 13th in the NFL in rushing yards and 5th in rushing touchdowns with 7. However, that should come down a little bit because 7 was an outlier year for him. But overall, because I see that top 4 points per dropback, and we could project potentially 60 more dropbacks based on Todd Downing's play calling style, we're talking some exciting numbers for Ryan Tannehill. But more importantly, I think because of his draft cost today going at ADP QB 11, you're getting him in a safe place in that 9th round. So you can draft all your running backs, all your receivers, you can even have backups on your bench and then draft Ryan Tannehill in the 9th round. And you might have someone who could potentially see more volume and maybe even go from QB 11 last year to probably QB 6, for example.
Yeah, 2 years ago, he was the quarterback 7. And again, the efficiency is unbelievable. And if they can continue to work off the play action, which as long as Derrick Henry's healthy, they will be able to. And again, as a defense, it seems so simplistic, but it really comes down to, if you're a defensive coordinator, go and play, pregame it against the Titans, you either stack the box against Derrick Henry, which we know doesn't work anyway, or you play, cover 2 or whatever, and you have 2 incredible all-pro wide receivers and, a decent tight end over the middle as well. And Josh Reynolds playing at number 3, who I've been a fan of for a long time, who was buried in the depth chart and with the Rams. So it's like pick your poison with this team, and Ryan Tannehill can just, pluck all day long off the play action or feed it to Derrick Henry. And let's not forget, we saw it on national TV last year in the snow in Lambeau Field Ryan Tannehill snuck away for about a 70-plus yard touchdown run as well. He's kind of sneaky athletic there with on the ground as well. So Ryan Tannehill, Matt Stafford are my two favorite, pass on the big 6'8", whoever you deem the very top of quarterbacks. Once you get past that realm and you're in the, 7th, 8th, 10th, 12th round, depending on your league settings and formatting, Ryan Tannehill and Matt Stafford are absolutely my, late round, quote unquote, the beginning of the late round quarterbacks. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers, maybe a stud tight end, and then one of those quarterbacks. I feel absolutely great about my starting roster.
Read more, man. But let's talk about the real engine of this offense, which is Derrick Henry. You just kind of talked a little bit about his value. Still probably consistent top 5 ADP, no matter what format. I know a lot of people are a little worried about Derrick Henry in the sense of his workloads and his efficiency and all that stuff. But 4 of 5 offensive line starters returning is a good news for him. But Derrick Henry last year, 20.4 points per game was the RB4, and it wasn't even close. Expert consensus has him at 3. ADP has him at 4, and overall he's picked 4. Let's play a quick game, Sky, called How many yards and touchdowns can Derrick Henry lose and still be the RB4? Okay? So Derrick Henry could lose 500 yards, and he would still finish last year as the RB4. Derrick Henry could technically lose 9 touchdowns last year and still be the RB4. That's how ridiculous this guy was. But he also was 3.6 more points per game in half-point PPR than Chubb and Jones last year. So right there tells you that Derrick Henry it's not a close gap between him and it's like CMC, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, and everybody else. Like that's how it was last year. So when you really look into the numbers, you can't even look at RB4 versus RB5 because it's such a big gap that even if he loses all those, you just talked about the Vegas 1,500 yards. If he loses 500 yards and keeps relatively the same touchdown rate or touchdowns, he's still looking at an RB4 season. I'm going to explain why. His career points off touchdowns was 33%. Last year was only 31%. So right there, he was right on career average. It wasn't even an outlier season. His touches just went through the roof. On a per touch basis, he averages career 4.7 touchdowns for every touch. Last year was 4.5. So even when you look at the numbers, they were not out of line with Derrick Henry's career. So I looked at, let's say, for example, let's say he comes way down on his touches. Let's say he gets to 303. That's what he did in 15 games in 2019. So I just said, you know what? Let's get crazy. Let's say it was 16 games. If you take all his career efficiencies, he would have 1,460 yards and 14 touchdowns. That would result in 251 fantasy points last year. That would have been the RB4. So, like, when you look at the numbers and understand Derrick Henry, do not overthink it. I think he's consensus, the number 3 overall pick in half point and full and standard. I think he's consensus probably, I would even say 4 in full point. Kamara, I know you're big on, but at the same time, who knows with those quarterbacks if he's going to see the same level of PPR upside. So that's why I'm buying Derrick Henry, and that's his breakdown. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's no reason not to buy Derrick Henry. I would rather have another running back in full PPR is all that it comes down to. And you and I talk about this a lot on the show. We try to diversify the best that we can. You generally speak and research in a half PPR mindset. I speak and research in a full PPR mindset. And those of you that play standard league still or non-PPR, draft Derrick Henry 101 as far as I'm concerned. But in the other formats, in PPR especially, there's just other options there. But to your point, to you, Bobby, who's saying he doesn't need to catch the passes, he's got the workload. Week 17 last year at Houston when nobody was playing fantasy football anymore, 35 PPR fantasy points. Guess how many targets he had that week, Bobby?
1.
0. 0 targets. 34 carries, 250 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Not a single target over his final 2 games. He had 3 targets total over his final 5 games, absolutely dominated. Derrick Henry's the man. I'm not worried about him in particular. It's going to be with Arthur Smith leaving, going to Atlanta. Are they going to have the same offense with Todd Downing? Are they going to still run through Derrick Henry with Julio Jones there, assuming he's healthy? And will the efficiency still be there with the Titans is all it is. What will not change for Derrick Henry this season, at least, Houston, Jacksonville, and the Colts defensive line is pretty good, but Houston and Jacksonville, he gets to play 4 games this year. We know that he absolutely rips up both of them. Last year, 2 games against Houston, 212 rushing yards, 250 rushing yards. Against Jacksonville, 84 in game 1 and 215 in game 2. So those 4 games alone could put him in the top 10, and then we could potentially look at the rest of the game. So love Derrick Henry, but if I'm in full PPR, I've got CMC, Cook, and Kamara, and then I personally am going to take Zeke, and I'm going to consider even taking Devontae Adams at number 5 potentially, which then pushes Derrick Henry to number 6 in full PPR.
All right, fair enough. Let's talk about the next guy, AJ Brown. I'm starting to have a little soft spot for AJ Brown. I think he's everyone's favorite receiver. He was all the hype, and then Julio Jones gets signed. Now everyone's like, well, he's maybe not that good. It's like, no, this guy's really good. Like, he's insanely good. So I've written about the opportunity analysis. I'll talk about that a lot and all the vacated and new available targets in my analysis. But let's break down A.J. Brown last year. So first off, 14.9 points per game, was the wide receiver 5 last year. But today he's going expert consensus 8, ADP 8, and then overall 24. So he's fallen behind his ADP. And, all we keep talking about is potentially more pass volume, But that's not going to help A.J. Brown. But here's another reason why you should love A.J. Brown still at wide receiver 5. There is 281 new available targets in this offense based on my analysis. That is number 2 in my metric. That is insane. Okay, that means Julio Jones could come walking into $150 if he wanted to, and there's still 130 more targets available for everybody else on this team. So I think, yes, I like Ferkser. I think he's going to get a couple more targets, but he's not going to get 100 more targets. He's going to get 75 more targets. He's probably going to get 25 to 30 more. And even A.J. Brown, he doesn't need that many more targets because he finished as the wide receiver 5 last year. Like, this is insane. So let's look at this so after week 4, when he returned from his injury, or he got sick, I think he got COVID or something. Something happened early on, I can't remember. Averaged 15.5 points per game. That was clearly the wide receiver 4 over that stretch. So 15.5 is elite. That's just behind Stephon Diggs last year over that time frame. Now, the other thing I look at, too, is how they in PFF, they do fantasy points per dropback for quarterbacks? Well, I kind of do it for receivers because I want to understand how much points they generate on a team. It gives you a better understanding of a player and how efficient they are on a per dropback basis. Last year, he was second. He averaged a fantasy point is 44% of his points versus dropback. So that is only behind Devontae Adams. That is insane amount of production. So if, for example, I just talked about Todd Downing, 592 dropbacks as offensive coordinator. If we apply that to A.J. Brown, based on his percentage of producing fantasy points to dropback, he jumps to 265 points. That would have been 0.1 ahead of Stephon Diggs for the wide receiver 3. That's what we're talking about here with his efficiency and the potential increase. Now, new OC Todd Downing, we've talked about this. Another great thing about Julio, the 2017 season, Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree were the 2 guys featured in that offense. They actually both ended up getting hurt at some point throughout the year, so they didn't play a lot of games together. But when they were both healthy, they averaged 7.8 targets per game together. Last year, A.J. Brown averaged 7.5. So when you even show that Amari Cooper and Crabtree were neck and neck with targets, and let's say Julio does the same thing, it's still higher than what he got last year. So when you look at all this information, it's telling you that A.J. Brown is probably going to see closer to 125, 130 targets this year. And based on his efficiency, he has top 3 upside. He's not going to touch Tyreek Hill 19 points per game because that's absurd. But those 2 guys, especially Hill and Adams, could see a drop in their efficiency and touchdowns, which could get them normalized. But overall, he's my number 5 receiver. I think he's a rock solid pick in the back of the second round.
Yeah, I totally agree. We just talked about week 17 with Derrick Henry against the Texans, and that he just ran for 250 yards on them in the final week of the season. A.J. Brown had 151 receiving yards in that game, 10 catches and a touchdown. So the idea that Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown can't coexist obviously is false with the Titans. You're going to get into Julio in a second, so I'll kind of wait for that take, but that's going to be interesting here. I look to my man Mike Tagliere, friend of the show, and you do your opportunity analysis. Tags also does his own. What he does is basically like everywhere on the football field has a certain value to fantasy football. a catch or a carry on the 6-yard line is much more valuable than a catch or carry on the 46-yard line, obviously. So Tags breaks all of that down. Based on his data, last year, the efficiency for A.J. Brown is insane. And I'm not saying it will regress necessarily because it hasn't in the 2 years that he's done this, but this is how insane it was. Based on Tags research, Mike Tagliere, Fantasy Pros, if you're unaware, based on Tags research, A.J. Brown was supposed to finish as the wide receiver 30 last year. He finished as wide receiver 12 in this metric. The year before that, he was supposed to finish as wide receiver 49 with the targets and the receptions and yardage that he had, but the efficiency boosted him up to wide receiver 15. So his efficiency is absolutely unbelievable. No reason to think it can't continue because this entire offense has broken all those metrics. But if they come back down to earth, Bobby, and you just made a great case why he will stay at the top, I don't disagree with you necessarily. But if any of this levels off with Julio Jones or more Derrick Henry or the offense sputters for some reason or whatever, then I think that's going to be a big collapse for him because he's been behind a great amount of touchdowns as well. So I also have him as a top 8 wide receiver. Ceiling, I think, is top 3. I agree with you. But if anything falls off track, he could be top 12 or, a 12th, 15th receiver if the efficiency falls off a little bit. Because of that, I have somebody like DK Metcalf, who I know is not as popular as A.J. Brown, but I just don't believe in Tyler Lockett. You and I have gone over this constantly in that offense. So yeah. I'm going to take DK Metcalf over A.J. Brown. But a guy like Justin Jefferson, I would put behind A.J. Brown. And then, of course, the big 4 or the big 3, big 4, I should say, with Adams, Hopkins, Diggs, and Hill, I will take ahead of DK and then Brown. So Brown's my 6th, but I definitely see the upside of what you're talking about.
All right. And I understand that. So when you're looking at the potential for the 2 receivers, the next guy's Julio Jones. This guy doesn't have a lot of practice being a second receiver because this guy was legitimately dominant throughout his career. So it'll be interesting to see how Julio handles this transition. I think Julio Jones, of course, you don't have to sit here and tell you how good this guy is. So if you look at his numbers last year, 13.4 points per game, finished as the wide receiver 13 in points per game. So still elite production, even when he's on the field. He also had a couple weird games in there too, so it could even be higher. 17 in ECR expert consensus ranking, 21st in ADP for wide receivers, and he's going at 48th overall. So let's talk a little bit about my breakdown for Julio. We have to start where Corey Davis was getting targets. His 16-game pace, Corey Davis last year was 105 targets because of the offense. Not too much volume. There is room for growth here, but I'm just taking a look at if he just fills in the Corey Davis role. Corey Davis was good last year, everybody. I know Julio's better, but he was still very good. So on the 105 targets, if you just take Julio's career catch percentage, you take his yards per target and his touchdown rate, he would add 166 fantasy points on the 105 targets. That would have been wide receiver 26 last year. Now, if we look at the additional dropback potential with Todd Downing, if we add all the extra dropbacks in, he jumps to 185.5 points. That would have been wide receiver 20 last year. So his ADP is wide receiver 21. Now, this offense I'm expecting a little bit more volume. And Julio, of course, Julio Jones can command a little more targets than Corey Davis. But just something to keep in mind to understand his ceiling. And I think his ADP is perfect. I actually like his ADP. I'm buying him at ADP 21. But I just talked a little bit about the pace that Corey Davis was on. If they do get the additional dropbacks, we're still looking at wide receiver 20 based on the fact that he's not going to be a threat for 150, 130 targets probably in this offense. So that's kind of why I am buying Julio Jones at his ADP, but I am not reaching him over guys. I like Tyler Lockett. You don't. I like Adam Thielen over him. I also like guys like Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper in those ranges. Mike Evans, for example, I would take over Julio. So based on his slip, he actually slipped. He was actually in the beginning of the 4th. Now he's going to the back of the 4th. I'm now buying Julio Jones, especially at his current ADP. What's your thoughts on Julio?
Oh, man, I can't quit Julio Jones. Julio Jones is probably my favorite active player right now. He is obviously phenomenal. We don't need to talk about his history. He's been incredible. But I will say a couple misconceptions of Julio Jones. You know, people are talking like he's at the end of he is heading toward the end of his career. Obviously, he's over 30 years old, but he's not done yet. And if he can stay healthy, which I know has been a challenge for Julio, if he can stay healthy, he's going to be just fine. First of all, he has played at least 14 games in 7 of the last 9 seasons. So he's not quote unquote injury prone. He does play through a lot of injuries because he plays kind of a reckless style of ball, but he plays through them at least. And we know that Julio Jones has played 3/4 of a ton of games over the last decade and still produced absolutely elite numbers. If he were to stay healthy for a full season, he's going to blow the doors off of his perception this year. He had at least 1,394 yards. So basically at least 1,400 yards in 6 of the last 7 seasons. Last year, of course, he lost a few games due to injury. Last year also, he had a career high in yards per target at 11.3. So Julio Jones is not done, first of all, and I think the Titans got an absolute steal in this, first of all. He's going as the ECR expert consensus ranking has him at wide receiver 19 in PPR. I have him at 13, and I know that could if he plays 10 games, I know this is going to burn me. I hope he stays healthy, and I'm projecting that he does stay healthy because I don't project injuries. And honestly, I want him in my top 12 out of respect, and I can't put him over a guy like Terry McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Allen Robinson. But I do have him, Bobby, and this is where I think you and I disagree on Julio Jones more than maybe any other player that we've covered together so far. And it's not like we disagree on the player. We obviously both love Julio, but it's the situations. I don't see the gap between A.J. Brown and Julio Jones this year. I don't see it as exponential as the industry does, with A.J. Brown essentially wide receiver 5 and Julio wide receiver 19. I don't see that. I see A.J. Brown about 7 and Julio at about 13. So I've closed the gap quite a bit. I've got him over Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Robert Woods, Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Cooper Kupp, yada, yada, at number 13. So I think the touchdowns will be there. The efficiency will be there. I think that you just mentioned that he could have 120 targets easy in this offense, and there's still room to grow. You can give 140 targets, whatever. So I do think that if he can stay healthy, and I know it's a big if with Julio Jones, with 14 games on his plate out of 17, I think that he could get that in. And if he does, I think he's going to be a top end wide receiver 2 minimum, and maybe a back end wide receiver 1 if one of these top guys falls. The only knock on Julio Jones for his entire career, aside from hiccups with injury, which I just mentioned, he's at least played the majority of his games in his career, is he doesn't have the touchdown upside. That might change in this offense because of the upside, in the scoring proficiency and the efficiency overall. But, you got to double cover somebody. And when they double cover, stack the box with Derrick Henry and then put an extra safety over on A.J. Brown, Julio Jones should be wide open. And at this point of their careers, I trust Ryan Tannehill more than Matt Ryan to find Julio Jones in the end zone. And what was frustrating in studying Julio Jones over the years is Matt Ryan literally would say, I don't target Julio Jones in the end zone because he's triple covered. It drives us fantasy people nuts that he doesn't have 5 touchdowns a game, because he should, like Calvin Johnson used to. But if he is triple covered, they got to go somewhere else. So Matt Ryan used to go somewhere else. Ryan Tannehill, I think, because of Derrick Henry, because of A.J. Brown, has those other weapons. Julio Jones is going to see single coverage. When he does, it's a jump ball. And if you remember that Patriots game in the fog, when he literally ripped the ball out of the hands for the touchdown, Julio's got a chip on his shoulder. He's never been doubted in his entire career. It's happening this year. And I expect a big season from him outside of injury. Obviously, I'm probably the highest on Julio Jones in the entire fantasy community.
All right, listen, man. You know what? I'll give you that one. That's fine, because I'm going to talk about the guy I'm high on. That's Anthony Firkser.
Who?
Yeah, exactly, man. I love it. So Anthony Firkser is an interesting character. We talked a little bit about him on a previous guest spot. I kind of view him as a poor man's Mark Andrews. So the thing comes out, the Titans unofficial depth chart, and he's number 2 behind Jeff Swaim, Goff Swaim, whatever. I keep forgetting which one it is. But anyway, the point is, I kind of view him as a poor man Mark Andrews, because Swaim is probably going to be the blocker like Nick Boyle was. People don't remember last year, Mark Andrews got off to a slower start because Nick Boyle was on the field more because he's a better blocker. I kind of view it the same situation here, low pass volume offense. But the biggest difference is they don't have a pass catcher to go along with Anthony Firkser like Jonnu Smith last year. The Titans as a team last season were 3rd in the NFL in producing fantasy points from the tight end position at 13.9. The reason why it's so high, but there was no real dominant guy. Yes, Jonnu was good, but he was very touchdown dependent because they had two guys splitting work, essentially 55-45 on the target perspective. Jonnu just got all the touchdowns. Firkser had one touchdown last year on the season. So right there is the problem. If you combine their stats, Jonnu Smith, Anthony Firkser, 80 receptions, 835 yards, 9 touchdowns. Okay? That's 11 points per game in half-point PPR. That's the tight end 4 in fantasy on points per game basis last year, right behind George Kittle. Now, the guys replacing Jonnu, Swaim and Luke Stocker, have a career highs of 32 targets and 27 targets. Them combined is not higher than the 65 targets Jonnu Smith has last year. The one game that Jonnu Smith missed last year, Firkser had 5 catches for 55 yards. Right there is a nice-looking baseline. Double digits in PPR. That's about 8 points in half-point PPR. And I know 8 points isn't sexy, but 8 points from a tight end, people don't realize how hard it is to predict tight ends. But if you get roughly 8 points on a consistent basis, that's a godsend. He also led the team in pretty much every slot usage metric, routes, targets, receptions, yards last year. So he got his great utilization in the slot, which also allows them to play 2 tight end sets. If he's taking more on slot, you keep Goff Swaim in line. So I think Anthony Firkser to me is someone that I'm going to continue to monitor. Am I pulling the trigger on Firkser a lot yet? No. But at the same time, he's someone I just keep watching for reports. He's someone I have my eye on. He's making a lot of big plays, especially in the middle of the field. And the other thing, too, is I know Josh Reynolds is your boy, but he's not a true slot receiver. They don't really have a true slot receiver on this team, so it could open up more opportunities for Firkser to continue that role in 2021.
The biggest argument you got going for you is the opportunity, and that's really what happened with Mark Andrews when he came on. Remember, Mark Andrews was the second tight end there with the Ravens for quite a while, and he just was able to blossom and took care of opportunity and got more work. Boom, he was the head guy there. Again, with Julio coming in, the opportunities there with the target vacancies, but I just don't see a world at all where I'm drafting Anthony Firkser, but I will say he is a name that I'm absolutely monitoring over the first 5 or 6 games of the season. There's always tight ends. We mentioned this on, I feel like, every other episode. The late round tight ends that nobody pays attention to this time of year, and they spring up, and all of a sudden you have a Robert Tonyan, right? All of a sudden you have a Logan Thomas, and you have, Hawkinson and Andrews from the years past, Darren Waller and so forth. Firkser could be one of those guys because of the opportunity. Also, I love the schedule to start the season. Arizona should be a shootout. At Seattle should be a shootout. Indianapolis should be a shootout in division. You never know. At the Jets, Jacksonville should be a shootout. And in Buffalo and Kansas City back-to-back, they're going to have to throw to catch up. I love that, and I will pay attention to what Firkser's got going on in the first half of the season. My concern here is going to be, we know that with tight ends, if you're not Darren Waller or, one of these other guys that springs up, usually the late round tight ends are exploding because of touchdown upside. I don't see that happening with Firkser. A couple reasons. He's short for a tight end, which I don't think is a huge deal. Most tight ends in the NFL, 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". He's 6'2". Still a big man, but in NFL terms, 6'2", 250 is not huge for a tight end. He also has just 3 touchdowns on 97 targets in his career. So that worries me a little bit. Again, I think that they're going to look at Julio Jones and A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry first. So being the 4th look pretty much inside the red zone hurts Anthony Firkser. But again, I don't like the stab for somebody to pay attention to. I don't see a world where you're taking him unless he's a dynasty stash on a deep roster.
Okay, fair enough.
I do have him buried down here. I was just looking at my rankings, and I've got him in roughly the Blake Jarwin, Irv Smith, Cole Kmet range. So probably like 17 to 20-ish. And look, he is getting some hype in the preseason and in camp and stuff. He's getting a lot of work in quick drills. That's probably, Julio Jones isn't out there. But that is boding well for the relationship. And again, Jonnu's gone, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, and like I touched on too, sorry, before you go on, it's just like when we talk about these guys, so I apologize. I misspoke. 5 for 51. My apologies. And 7 targets in that game. Like, the thing is, when you see this is the Tyler Higbee conversation, like Gerald Everett's gone. It's a completely different world now. The tight end position is a little different. So I'm just saying, just look at the preseason games. Watch how it goes. Like once that Ryan Tannehill's in there, they might play maybe 1 game or 2 games at the most in the preseason. But watch those games. See if Ferkser's in there for a decent amount of snaps and see if he's getting some looks. So my thing is like the tight end situation after the tight end 6 is all up for grabs at this point. You basically have to flag plant your guys, but just keep an eye on it. Follow him on Twitter, yada yada. But let's move on. We've spent enough time on Anthony Ferkser.
I will say though, man, all summer you've been repping Anthony Ferkser, so we had to give you, you were contracted for your 6 minutes of Anthony Ferkser time. So congratulations there. All right, before we move on to the Houston Texans, and I know we've buried the lead on the podcast long enough. Our listeners are like, guys, just get to the Titans, please. Let's hear about the Texans. I know, folks, we appreciate you sticking with us. We'll get to the Texans eventually, but before we do that, I got to give a shout out to the Jersey Jungle. I just got word today, ladies and gentlemen, I have been repping the fact that I have a handful of jerseys in the mail on the way. I just got a heads up today that they should be here by the end of the week, and I'll probably do an unboxing this weekend for you once I get them. If you're unfamiliar somehow and you've been listening to this podcast, you know about the Jersey Jungle. The Jersey Jungle has authentic jerseys from all sports teams, all sports, home, away, retro, throwbacks, camo, if you like that style. They have custom jerseys available if you're a part of a softball team. I've been finishing up my softball leagues. You can do a softball team. I have a great friend of ours, listener of the show in the UK, and she plays American football in the UK, and she had a custom jersey made for herself from the Jersey Jungle. Your own name, your own number, whatever it is, they can do customs as well. DM them on Instagram at the Jersey Jungle. Make sure at checkout you use the promo code TCK for 10% off of 1 or 2 jerseys. I just recommend you get 3+ though. 15% off of 3+ jerseys. I put in an order, spoiler alert, a couple football, a couple baseball. Again, I'll let you know who those players are when I get them. Some are throwbacks. I got a Hall of Famer in there, maybe 1 or 2. I got some upstart ballers in both sports. I got some of my fantasy studs. Very excited about this, but I had to go more than 3 because the more you buy, the cheaper it gets. NFL.com has $120 to $30 on jerseys. Jersey Jungle has $60 to $65, 55 for baseball, 60 for the NFL. Go get yourself an authentic stitch and twill jersey at the Jersey Jungle on Instagram, promo code TCK. All right, Bobby, classic question. It's been a while since you and I have done a team preview, so I am curious about your stance currently on these 2 teams and what you're thinking about for the jerseys. So if you're looking at the Titans, you're looking at the Texans, there's a lot of options here for fantasy football. There's also some throwbacks. If you're on YouTube and you're looking behind me here, I got my man Earl Campbell, Hall of Famer, incredible running back. They got throwbacks as well. I got Mark Brunell over my other shoulder, lefty from UW up north in Washington. What jersey are you looking for, Bobby, football related for the Texans or the Titans?
My favorite fantasy player of all time is Arian Foster. Love Arian Foster. He would be a slam dunk. Current, it's Anthony Ferkser. So I don't even know why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, that seemed obvious.
Yeah, let's get to the Texans, man. You know, Sky did some research for us. I'm excited. I'm going to jump into the host seat right now, and I'm going to work Sky up a little bit, get him going.
Boy.
So David Culley comes over, the new head coach from the Ravens. Kind of a weird name. No one really looked at him as a guy. He was the passing game coordinator for the Ravens, which I feel like nothing better right there. But they retained their offensive coordinator, Tim Kelly, which I think is pretty interesting. He did show some good things with Deshaun Watson last season. The offensive line, a little bit of shakeups. They did lose 2 of their starters last year. They brought over Justin Britt, who actually didn't play last year. So the interior is somewhat of a change, but the tackles are pretty solid for them overall. They have done the weirdest acquiring of players you'll ever see. Tyrod Taylor, Mark Ingram, Miffy, Rex Burkhead, Chris Connolly, Anthony Miller via trade, drafted Nico Collins, Davis Mills, and Brevin Jordan. Now, this kind of feels like the island of misfit toys. Deshaun Watson, probably not going to play, probably going to be Tyrod Taylor, potentially Davis Mills halfway through the season based on how things are rolling. So, Sky, anything that stands out to you overall from the Texans standpoint?
Oh boy. Yeah. I feel like I spent 2 hours that I shouldn't have for the Houston Texans. I got one of my best friends here in Eugene is a huge Houston Texans fan because of Arian Foster back in the day. And I know that he wants to hear all this information here, but I got to be honest, Bobby, it was tough digging for positive things to say in fantasy football. No disrespect to the players, obviously, you know how we roll around here, but it was tough. I mean, here's the deal. It comes down to Deshaun Watson. I don't think he's going to play at this point either. Earlier in the summer, I was confident even that he would play. At this point, I just don't see it. I also help Ryan Leaf, former NFL quarterback, of course, on his show, the RDL show. And we've had some ESPN insiders and stuff come on his show and talk about the legal ramifications of Deshaun Watson specifically throughout the summer, dating back to April. And early on, it was like definitely not suspended. And then it was kind of like, yeah, maybe I think they'll let him play. But now it's like, okay, now the NFL might suspend him even if he gets away. It's so unknown. And if Deshaun Watson doesn't play, I'm staying away from this team almost completely for fantasy football. If he plays somehow, even if he's suspended halfway through the season, maybe I'll look at waivers or a late round trade or something like that. But unfortunately, it all hinders on Deshaun Watson, obviously. Quick talks about Deshaun, and then we'll move on. I don't want to spend too much time on this here. Still under the investigation for the 22 counts of illegal or alleged, I should say, sexual assault. If you have not been paying attention and it's August and you're finally coming back to fantasy football and you don't pay attention all year like we do, not a big deal. That's why we're here for you. Deshaun Watson has been in hot water since draft day, unfortunately. He's at camp so that he doesn't get fined. Literally, he shows up so that he doesn't get fined by the team, but he's not participating, which means he doesn't plan to play. The team's not having him plan to play. He's actively mentioning that he wants out of Houston. He doesn't want to play for the franchise anymore. The franchise won't trade him because he's too valuable to the franchise, right? The NFL may still suspend him, as I mentioned. Deshaun Watson has been incredible the last 3 seasons as a player on the field, as we know. QB4, QB5 in the last 3 seasons, respectively. If he's cleared by draft day, then enjoy the value because he's plummeting to like the 10th, 12th, 15th round because people are taking flyers, but he's not there. But I would not draft him at all in redraft leagues. If you want to, quote unquote, buy low on him in Dynasty, be my guest. But I'm not going to tell you to do that because who knows if he's ever going to play again, right? But he also might leave the team and sit out this year and leave the team and go somewhere else and blossom. Who knows? He's still a great player, still young. I digress. Let's move on to Tyrod Taylor. This one is a bummer. I've rooted for Tyrod Taylor for years. Last year, of course, he gets injured and then he gets the,
punctured lung.
Tyrod Gate, right? Where he gets stabbed by his own doctor, team doctor. And unfortunately, so he misses the season. My man, Justin Herbert, which I'm so grateful that Herbie got a chance, unfortunately, at the expense of Tyrod Taylor. Justin Herbert steps in, lights the league on fire, rookie of the year, breaks all the records. The rest is history. Now, he moves on to Houston and gets a chance because Deshaun Watson's out. But if Watson comes back, Tyrod Taylor's out of a job again. 2 years ago, Baker Mayfield, right? Tyrod Taylor goes down. Baker Mayfield as a rookie comes in, rookie of the year, breaks all the records, yada, yada. So we'll see what happens with Davis Mills this year. A lot of concerns happened for me and Tyrod Taylor. And look, this is like super flex 2 QB max that you're looking at, a late round flyer on Tyrod Taylor. First of all, they only brought him in for 1 year, $12.5 million. $12.5 million to a guy like Bobby and I would change our lives forever and the rest of our family lineage for decades. To an NFL quarterback, that's scratch. All right, that's nothing. They don't count on him for next year. He won't be on the team next year. They don't even count on him for this year necessarily. Unfortunately, he last played full-ish seasons. I say that because he only played 14, 15 games in these last couple of years. 2015, 16, and 17. 18, 19, and 20, he played less than 6 games. Or 8 games, excuse me. He was QB 15 in 2015, QB 9 in 2016, and QB 16 in 2017. So those are respectable QB 2 numbers with QB 1 upside. Here's the problem. His career highs, so that was 4 to 6 years ago. The NFL has changed to a passing heavy league, as we know. His career highs of his entire career, 3,035 passing yards. Last year, that would have been 19th in the NFL. 20 passing touchdowns is his career high on a season. Would have been tied for 19th with Jared Goff last year. 63.7% completion percentage, career high. Last year would have been 30th in the NFL between Tua Tagovailoa and Baker Mayfield in 2020. Now, he does average a rushing floor, which is nice for quarterbacks. He averages about 525 rushing yards over those 3 seasons, as I mentioned, and 5 touchdowns. Solid. That would have been 4th among quarterback rushing yards last year behind only Lamar, Kyler, and Cam. He's not going to be Lamar Jackson. He's not going to be Kyler. We know that. He could be Cam Newton from last year with better throwing efficiency. Unfortunately, I just don't see it for Tyrod Taylor. Davis Mills is the guy that I would even consider in dynasty leagues to just stash. I liked him a lot out of Stanford. He's just not going to get a chance. But again, Tyrod Taylor hasn't been able to stay healthy the last 3 seasons. And you have to say it. The draft capital obviously leans to Baker and Justin Herbert being top 6 picks. Mm-hmm. But if he goes down, Davis Mills might have an opportunity with obviously a roughshod team, but might have an opportunity. So Davis Mills is somebody that I'm taking in the 5th round of a dynasty rookie draft. Other than that, though, I'm sticking away from Tyrod Taylor. I've talked a lot. Give me your thoughts on the quarterback situation there, and then I'll blow through the running backs and pass catchers.
Well, the thing about Tyrod that makes him relevant is his rushing ability. And the problem is he's tried not to run as much, which I just feel like is not good for the team. I mean, he's not a great thrower of the football. He's good. He's fun. And listen, when you look at his 2017 season, his top receivers were Deontay Thompson, Zay Jones, Jordan Matthews, Kelvin Benjamin. Like, I'm sorry, but no one's going to play well with those guys as your receivers. So it's kind of a joke that we sit here and point. His one great season, that 2015 year that he was really good, he had Sammy Watkins when he was healthy. After that, it was kind of like Robert Woods was still very young. He hasn't really had much talent. And the interesting thing is the Texans. All right, so I take it as a different view. I'm not even concerned about Tyrod Taylor. What I'm interested in is that every single Texans player is being drafted outside the top 40 for their position. So the question comes, is anybody of value? Right. So I just took a look at, just in general, what players produced with Tyrod Taylor. So 2015, LaShawn McCoy was the RB11, 2016 RB4, and 2017 RB10. So top 11 finishes every year. So the ground game has not necessarily suffered with Tyrod Taylor running the show. Wide receiver, Sammy Watkins, wide receiver 9 in 2015, great season. But then 2016, he gets banged up, wide receiver 55. 2017, are you kidding me? Like, just the players. It wasn't even like anybody I think it was like 100 or something, like Deontay Thompson. Insane. But Charles Clay was his only consistent average between 7.1 and 7.4 points per game in half-point PPR. Okay, not ideal, but streamable tight end. 2018, Carlos Hyde, RB20 the first 2 weeks with Tyrod Taylor before they made the switch to Baker halfway through the 3rd game. Landry was the wide receiver 30. So everything so far inside the top 40 for the most part. Austin Eckler, 1 game in 2020. I know this is nitpick a little bit. Austin Eckler was the RB28 that game. Mike Williams, wide receiver 37. He actually played better than Keenan Allen. Hunter Henry was the tight end 13. So there's going to be – the problem is I think it's an obvious one. I think it's probably Brandon Cooks. We'll get to him in a second. But overall, I just feel like when I look at Tyrod Taylor, there's going to be someone that comes out of this fantasy relevant. And I think Brandon Cooks seems to be the lamp. I think the problem is there's no clear answer on who the guy is. Is it Phillip Lindsay at running back, Mark Ingram, David Johnson? It sounds like it's Phillip Lindsay early downs, David Johnson late round, but then Mark Ingram's David Culley's boy. Another good thing, though, is David Culley was the QB coach for Tyrod Taylor in 2017 on the Bills. So David Culley at least has seen him play and actually brought him in. So I guess that gives me some confidence that Tyrod might get a little time. But overall, if they start 1-5, they got to go to Davis Mills and just see what he has.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense not to.
No, they have to. And Bobby, look, and you know how much I love and appreciate your deep analysis on these players and what year they played with them. And yes, somebody will be relevant just because somebody's got to eat and get the most carries, get the most catches, whatever. You're never going to draft, man, I like this guy in the 9th round. I hope he's the wide receiver 37. History tells me somebody with Tyrod Taylor is going to be the wide receiver 37. It doesn't matter. I mean, again, I'm going to get to Brandon Cooks in a little bit. If I draft Brandon Cooks in the 11th round as my flyer guy, and he's Brandon Cooks of years past, he might blow that ADP out of the water. He also may end up as the wide receiver 56 because of the situation. And I'm just staying away from that. Let me get into the running backs here. And then we'll dive into Brandon Cooks. So I know everyone wants to hear about Brandon Cooks, but let me get through these running backs here quickly. This is an absolute mess. Okay. David Johnson, incredible a few years ago with the Cardinals. He has not returned. Decent year last year. Okay. Over 1,000 total yards and 8 touchdowns, but he had less than 1 yard per route run last year. 0.94 yards per route run last year. Coming into camp, he's the 2nd or 3rd string as of right now. He has vocalized to the Texans reporter for The Athletic, basically saying, I get it. I'm the old guy and I'm 29. Philip Lindsay's younger. If he's coming in and I'm going to eat into my workload, I get that. Being a team guy, which I appreciate, whatever helps the team win, that kind of talk, which, look, guy's an incredible clubhouse guy. And if you listen to Fantasy Footballers, he's been on the show many times. Sounds like an incredible dude. For fantasy football, though, the David Johnson we all want is not going to return. And I'm staying away from it. 1,000 total yards last year, but that was basically in 2 games. One of them was at the very end of the season, in which you couldn't play him anyway. So he might even just be a third down back. Mark Ingram comes in from Baltimore last year. Again, another one of Coley's guys he brings in, and that's cool. Again, it's all about relationships. Brings in Mark Ingram. Okay, Mark Ingram had just 350 total yards over last 11 games last year in Baltimore. We know about J.K. Dobbins. We know Lamar Jackson does his thing, on the ground as well. 350 total yards in 11 games for Mark Ingram last year. Now he's lost in this crowded backfield, might even be cut, they're talking about in the camp, because Rex Burkhead, who I'm not even going to talk about, is also on this roster. Somebody's got to go. It might be Burkhead. It could be also Mark Ingram as well once the 53-man roster comes around here. In 2019, Mark Ingram was bolstered by 15 total touchdowns, right? 5 receiving, 10 rushing, but he still had just 1,200 total yards in a prolific Ravens offense. Now we know that 1,200 yards is nothing to sneeze at, and 15 total touchdowns is phenomenal, but the efficiency of that offense and what they do running the ball strictly before J.K. Dobbins made the team is just not going to happen again this year. He's now 31 years old. 31 years old, Bobby, is what you and I diagnosed a couple weeks back when we did age analysis for running backs. It's not 30. It's 31. And I know we're nitpicking by literally 6 to 12 months on a real calendar, but the idea is we saw an absolute cliff from 29 to 30 with Mark Ingram. 31, he could be potentially cut. I don't want anything to do with Mark Ingram. Finally, Philip Lindsay. He's the only one that I might consider late just because he's still young. He's got the upside. We'll see what happens. Since the start of 2018, Philip Lindsay ranks 10th in rushing yards among all running backs. He's averaged nearly 5 yards per carry, 4.78 during that time. So as a running back individually, Philip Lindsay has been phenomenal. Last year, he only played 11 games, unfortunately. He had back-to-back 1,200-plus total yard seasons with at least 7 touchdowns in 2018 and 19, of course, coming in as a rookie and unfortunately supplanting my man Royce Freeman, who has never seen the field since. Even if he's the starter, he's a late-round flyer at best on a bad offense. I don't expect to score a lot. Again, the ghost of David Johnson is no longer worth it for me no matter where he's at. Mark Ingram probably won't even be on the team. I don't want to deal with that. Burkhead's not talk about a bull. And Philip Lindsay, I might take a flyer on late, but when are you going to play him? On a bye week and an injury? I see you keeping him on your roster for 5 or 6 weeks, and then you're going to have some hot shot on the waiver that happens every year. Philip Lindsay's going to be the guy you're probably going to drop. So why even waste a draft pick on him? Again, I know I'm boo-hoo on this entire episode here, but I'm having a lot of trouble finding the value, even deep on draft day, for these running backs.
I think the biggest problem for Philip Lindsay is the only guy I would be interested in, but the thing is, he split work last year with Melvin Gordon. He averaged 5.7 points per game. He's a non-factor in the pass game. He is not a great pass catcher. He's never been a good pass pro. He's a smaller back. He actually got that bad wrist injury a couple of years ago, which prevented him from doing stuff. And David Johnson will probably be the third down back. He'll probably get the most passing game work. And then if it's anything like, remember, J.K. Dobbins wasn't anything that great until Mark Ingram went away. So there's not even a guarantee Ingram's going to be going away. He might still get those 5 to 7 touches, but he's on a bad offense led by Tyrod Taylor. When I was breaking it down, McCoy was a workhorse. McCoy got 300 plus touches in those seasons. So that's not going to happen. But the point was, there is going to be some value. I think the guy we're going to talk about next is probably the value. But I think Philip Lindsay going at RB 49. What if, for example, they realize Mark Ingram's more of like, hey, we'll have you on there, and they start giving him 13, 14 carries a game. Lindsay's got the special talent to get you 6 points because, what's the touchdown equity? Maybe 1 every 3-4 games? I mean, that's why it's just like, don't waste your time. Go get somebody with more upside. I agree 100%. Let's talk about Brandon Cooks, Scott. Give me what you got.
Oh, man. Brandon Cooks is the one that I would be willing to take because his value at this point has plummeted because of the uncertainty with Deshaun Watson, and then nobody's confident with Tyrod Taylor / Davis Mills. And unfortunately, the theme of my half of this episode, I'm not confident either, but he's still Brandon Cooks. Over the last 6 years with 4 different quarterbacks, there have been just 7 wide receivers who have topped 24 at least 5 of the last 7 seasons. So they've been a top 24 wide receiver in 5 of the last 7 seasons. Listen to these names: Mike Evans, Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, your boy Amari Cooper, Jarvis Landry somehow, and Brandon Cooks. That's incredible company. And this, again, like Phillip Lindsay and even maybe David Johnson for 4 games, these guys are incredible talents. The situation is what I don't like, okay? He started with Drew Brees, then he went to Tom Brady, then he went to Jared Goff, went to a Super Bowl, and then last year with Deshaun Watson, he still had 81 catches on 119 targets, so second most targets of his entire career, 1,150 yards, which was the 3rd most he's ever had in his career, and 6 touchdowns, which is the 4th most he's ever had in his career. So last year, he was still dominant Brandon Cooks, and you get him – last year, I think it was 5th or 6th round I was drafting him in, and he finishes as an RB or a wide receiver 2 with week winning upside, of course. I think it was Thanksgiving Day that he had a handful of I don't have it pulled up in front of me. He had a handful of catches and went nuts on a couple of deep bombs and some touchdowns. So he still has the talent. Tyrod Taylor does not tend to force the ball down the field. He also is one of those quarterbacks that if things break down, he wants to run, not scramble. Like Deshaun Watson is a great running quarterback. We know that. He's also very good at scrambling out of the pocket, looking deep downfield. It was DeAndre Hopkins for years. Last year was Brandon Cooks, and finding that guy 40 yards downfield on a broken play. Will Fuller as well. Deshaun is incredible at doing that. Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, whatever. Tyrod Taylor's not that guy. If it breaks down, he's going to try to run for a 6-yard gain and not get sacked and try again. And Brandon Cooks is just not that possession style, soak up the targets kind of a guy. Again, 84 receptions is his career high. That's just not going to get it done. I don't expect him to have more than 5 touchdowns this year, maybe 1,000 yards just because of his deep ball ability, but I don't see that happening. Again, worth a flyer. If you're going to draft Deshaun Jackson, you might as well draft Brandon Cooks 4 rounds earlier than that and get more consistency out of him. So I'll take a flyer on him. But unfortunately, this isn't about Brandon Cooks. It has nothing to do with him. It's either Tyrod Taylor or the lack of offense, which I'm expecting. I don't like that. I'll just throw a couple names at you, and I'm not even going to get deep into these guys. Anthony Miller gets finally cut by the Bears. He gets sent over to Houston. He's already injured. Kiki Cutie, been fun for fantasy for about 6 games of his career. Chris Conley, you mentioned pre-show. Fantastic preseason game 1. 3, fine. But are we really counting on Chris Conley? I don't think so. Nico Collins is the rookie out of Michigan. A lot of people are high on Nico Collins. I actually like him as a player a lot. I think he eventually becomes at least the number 2 this year, and next year probably the number 1 when they get rid of Cooks. Nico Collins I like as a dynasty stash, but again, a redraft, no thank you. And I'm just going to throw Jordan Akins in here because we don't need a tight end segment for this team. Again, there's another one out there too, I guess, if you want to bring them up later on. But the pass catchers I'm just not excited about in this offense. If there's anybody here, it's Brandon Cooks. Very late in drafts, but again, I'm probably just going to take another high upside guy instead that I'm more confident in.
Well, he's going in the 8th round. He's not even that late. Cooks is going in the 8th. It's not even
for him. It feels late, but you're right.
Yes,
it's not.
Yeah, so it's just like let's do this really quick then. Like let's break this down. Michael Gallup or Brandon Cooks?
Gallup every day.
Love Mike Williams even as or Brandon. Mike Williams, Brandon Cooks.
Mike Williams. I love both those guys.
Yeah, so Jarvis Landry, Brandon Cooks.
I'll probably take Brandon Cooks because I believe in Odell this year.
All right, so Will Fuller.
That one's a tough one. Probably Cooks. I don't believe in Tua yet, and Will Fuller's missing the game at least.
Last one, Darnell Mooney.
Mooney. I think Justin Fields and Mooney are going to be insane eventually.
Yeah. So you're probably that's right there. So you're more of the back of the 8th, but you're willing to take him. But there's some guys in the 8th round you're going to take over him. So good to know. I just want to talk about one guy with the Texans tight ends. So it's just something that came up when I was doing a little research. It's Pharaoh Brown. So Pharaoh Brown last season kind of jumped over. He's been kind of a career journeyman guy, but he's really grabbed the attention of this team. He's also leapfrogged Jordan Akins. Darren Fells is now gone. But here's why he caught my attention. First off, He's 6'6", 260. He's more known as a run-blocking tight end. He's a dominant run blocker. So I love the fact when these guys are already known for one thing, and if they have pass game chops, they're not going to leave the field. We talk about that a little bit with Adam Troutman. Texans retained offensive coordinator Tim Kelly. We did not talk enough about Tim Kelly in this episode. Tim Kelly really showed some things last year with Deshaun Watson. I do like the fact they kept him on. He has a tight ends coach background. The last 2 seasons, the Texans were 17th and 13th in tight end points per game as a team, so they do utilize the tight end a decent amount. Week 17 last year, Farrell Brown finally started getting some starts, but for week 17, 5 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown last year. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Logan Thomas situation when I talked about this previously, because Logan Thomas started getting a little work with the Lions. They bring him over, and next thing you know, he starts getting buzz, and he's starting to grow a little bit. Farrell Brown, same concept. Someone that I'm just going to keep an eye on because you just brought up, there's nobody at the receiver position that's going to stand out just besides Brandon Cooks. They do have some nice pieces. But finally, Charles Clay was Tyrod Taylor's guy consistently. And Hunter Henry, in the one game they played with in 2020, he was the best player on the field for the Chargers. So if that happens again, Tyrod leans on his tight end. Just someone that we should keep an eye on over the next couple of weeks and maybe the first 2 weeks of the preseason.
For fantasy purposes, I hope I'm super wrong and I've just been grumpy for no reason for the last 45 minutes. Unfortunately, man, doing my research, paying attention, this Deshaun Watson thing is just a pain in the ass at this point. Unfortunately, I just don't think there's going to be even the value there on a guy like Lindsey, a guy like Cooks. I might take in one draft just in case. And if they blow up, I'll eat it. But I just don't see it happening.
Me neither. I'm not taking any Texans. So I agree.
Neither. All right, man. You put me on the clock for just a little bit. Do you have a couple other names you want to do real quick or you want to get out of here?
Let's get out of here, man. Listen, you got to go play some base. We got to watch some baseball. We've given these people an hour's worth of Texans stuff, so I think we've done enough.
Well, how about this, Bobby? We will get out of here. Before we do that, though, I want you to expand the box score for this reason alone. For this reason alone, I want a listener to go into expand the box score. You're going to give all the deets in a second. Give me one reason I should draft any Houston Texans. If I agree with you, I'll get you into a listener league for free. How about that?
Oh, look at that. Sky delivering for us right now. So listen up. Expandtheboxscore.com is one of the sites we write for. This is just a new way to kind of expand your game, no pun intended, in the fantasy football realm. If you've been someone that's been just basic stats and you're looking for your first dip your toe into advanced stats, do it with Expand the Box Score. Not only are you getting things like contested catch rate, routes run, broken tackles. These are some things you typically don't get on your basic sites. This package is only $25. For something like PFF, it's $200 a year. Sports Info Solutions, $750 a year. But Expand the Box Score gives you something that's fantastic, simple to read, all the fantasy leaderboards, red zone stats, but also a scatter plot tool if you want to get really in-depth on certain things. So the best part about it is if you use the promo code TCK, you get $5 off and a 4-day free trial. So after 4 days, if you don't love it, the best part too is you get your money back. No questions asked. So please make sure you're checking this out. Do the free trial. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Check it out. Use that promo TCK and take your game to the next level with expandtheboxscore.com.
Absolutely. I want to give a shout out to our other sponsors, of course, Bomb Banana Hot Sauce, SeekTheSpice.com, and Jersey Jungle. DM them on Instagram for your authentic jerseys at the Jersey Jungle. This episode and all TCK episodes have been brought to you by BetOnline, BetOnline AG, or the mobile app. BetOnline, your online sports betting experts. Bobby, this is a tough one, man. I got through it, though. You heard me kind of boo-hoo and grumpify my way through the Texans, but we're through with that. Yeah. We are done with the AFC South. You and I are going to get into our studs, duds, breakout, sleepers. Those are the fun episodes. I'm excited for that one coming up. And then we have our final division, the NFC South. We got some heavy hitters in that one. I'm very excited about that. Stick around. We got more from the TCK, and we got a special announcement for you coming up this weekend. Stay tuned right here to the TCK pod. For my man, Bobby LaMarco, I'm your host, Sky Guasco, episode 433 in the books. Don't draft any Texans. We're out of here.